Welcome back, everybody. We're pretty much on time, so I hope everyone's all right. I know we didn't have a long break, but we still got two really important papers and discussion to move to now. So our first speaker providing a young carer perspective is Paris Zamarian. And Paris is, I need to go to my right pages, sorry. Paris's main caring role has been being a young carer for her grandmother from 2019 to early 2022. Prior to that, she also played a significant role in raising her younger siblings and spent much of her spare time as an after-school nanny. Recently this year, she's transitioned out of her caring role and has started learning how to look after just herself for the first time. And look, if anything raises or triggers anything for anybody in terms of the discussion that we're about to have, or anything that Paris might raise that might trigger something for you, we are putting up some supports and things in the chat. So be sure to access those supports if you need to. And we've got a couple of things up on the line, up on the screen at the moment. So I will hand over to Paris to present to us for the next 5 or so minutes, and then we'll be moving to Tanya, which I'll introduce then. So thank you, Paris.
Hi everyone. So it's great to be speaking here today. I really hope to shed some light on my experience as a young carer, as it's something that's not talked about very often at all. It's so easy to gaslight yourself into thinking that what you do is something so simple that every traditional gender performing mother has performed. I denied validity to the intricacies of my reality, instead taking on the notion that I'm constantly not doing enough. It's not until now that I'm out of the caring role that I realize how difficult it is to be a contributing member to society whilst also being a full-time carer. Being a carer can be a beautiful thing, but it also comes with considerable barriers to a person's career, studying, and being a typical young adult consumer in our fiscal sphere. Instead, young carers like myself are thrown into the deep end and must manage things that we never thought we'd need to manage at such a young age. There isn't a lot of grey area to being a carer, at least not in my experience. This module's meant to be all about economic transitions in respect to carers, but it's not a transition, it's a leap. My caring role with my grandmother started and ended due to domestic abuse. I'm ready to disclose that significant cause to me being a carer because it's the reason that I had to jump into being her unofficial financial manager at the age of 18. In the blink of an eye, I went from being a kid to a DV survivor to being my grandmother's carer looking after her finances. I didn't know anything. I didn't have anyone to teach me how to look after my own bills and responsibilities, so how could I have been expected to do it for someone else? I had to learn to read and manage bills, everyday banking, term deposits, insurance, and super for my grandmother. Within 1 month of me moving in, she received notice that one of her managed funds was closing due to underperformance, and it was my job to reinvest those shares. I wish I could tell you how I managed it. I really do. I wish there was a sequential train of thought, a path, a guide, or a plan that could have helped me do what needed to be done. I just finished my first year of university and my first subject or two in my finance major, but I cannot imagine what other carers like me who don't have any financial literacy would have done. I lived that time in constant fight or flight mode. There was no time to think or panic. My grandmother needed me, and her needs had to be put above my own. There is no plan, there is no guide, there is no transition. I woke up one day and all of a sudden was the representative for my grandmother's consumerism and economic contributions to society. At the same time, this economic representative model came at the expense of my own ability to fully contribute as a consumer. If I'm honest, I felt broken all the time. How could I be expected to keep up the facade of a young adult when every week I would cry in therapy saying that I woke up one day and felt like I've been 50 years old since? My peers would be studying in uni, stressed about exam results, internships, and stressed about being in lockdown. On the other hand, for me, COVID was scary, but lockdown was a blessing. I had to quit all my jobs to care for my grandmother whilst trying to stabilize my mental health and prepare both of us for court. I was having panic attacks being in class, panic attacks at parties, in the car, everywhere. Got to the point where I ended up in a terrifying car accident because of these panic attacks. It's completely impossible to work whilst being a full-time carer. There have been multi-month periods where I've had to call 000 weekly for my grandmother. I was in constant fear of this being the end for her and the fear of homelessness if I lost her. I acknowledge the needs of people who need carers. I also acknowledge the pain and the fear that it brought me. I regularly needed time to recover each day to bring me back to my baseline fight or flight mode. Just because someone has the physical time to work, it doesn't mean that they have the emotional and cognitive capacity to. I've been called lazy, a dull bludger, amongst other things, all because I couldn't maintain the same grades, get a job, another internship, and everything else someone my age is expected to do. What's worse is that there are a lot of these stereotypes that were placed on me by the person I was caring for. My grandmother relied almost entirely on me. The only aged care services she accepted were cleaning, lawn mowing, and transport services. I was her therapist, social support, cook, bartender, financial manager, handyman, and gardener. If I'm honest, that's not an exhaustive list, but I think the point stands regardless. I did a lot for her, but I didn't spend every minute of the day doing something for her. But just because the physical time is there, it doesn't mean you have the emotional and cognitive time. Those are just as valid and important to our survival. I wish I had more time to express my thoughts on this topic more comprehensively. Each time I was preparing for today, another 5 topics would sprout off the top of my mind that I wanted to discuss. However, I will leave you with this. This small fraction of my lived experience as a carer, it's not just unique to me. I'm one of many young carers. One of many young carers that believed they weren't enough, who didn't live with boundaries, and thought they deserved the challenges and hardships of the role. Now, as a paid support worker with professional boundaries in place, I realize that none of that is true. But not everyone out there does. I need each of you today to please remember the importance of emotional and cognitive time, the need for improved support for carers during and after their role, and the need to disrupt the stereotypes unpaid carers face each day. In an aging population where the aged care industry is breaking at the seams, the prevalence of young carers is only going to increase, making this ever more important to act on now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paris, for sharing your personal story, but also those extreme challenges. And I think it also signals a lot of things that we don't expect for young people to be doing, and the importance of really tailored and specific individual support for all carers, but particularly for young carers. Tailoring something specifically for you would be quite different to tailoring something for another young carer. So that's why I think being able to have that conversation and with a trusted person to be able to provide those direct supports is really important. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that will lead to a lot of discussion, and also goes back to, I think, some of the things you said around, the threats of homelessness and a whole range of other things, but also that expectation of some of the things, the negative things that you experienced in a workplace or in while you were studying. And I think it's important to think about, supporting carers within the workplace that do balance paid work with informal care, and what that looks like, and what that looks like in a meaningful way is really important. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Tanya King from the University of Melbourne. Tanya's a social epidemiologist who uses quantitative social science methods to understand the social and structural determinants of health inequities across the life course. She currently holds an Australian Research Council Discovery Early Career Researcher Award, that is focused on the lives and trajectories of young carers. So I'm going to hand over to Tanya for her presentation, and then we'll have discussion after that. So thank you very much, Tanya.
Thanks, Alina. I'll just share my screen with everybody. Thank you for that introduction. So Paris has provided a really sort of great context sort of from lived experience for my presentation, which is actually a little bit dry in comparison. It's about some focused on some data analysis in which we looked at the mental health effects of being a young carer. So some background, we define young carers as children and adolescents who provide informal unpaid care and support to someone else, typically a family member, with a disability, a physical or mental illness, substance dependency, or who is elderly. Now, among adult carers, it's known that caring can have impacts across many domains of life, and we have good evidence about its impact on mental health. And among young carers, there's a really rich body of qualitative evidence showing that caring can impact on many domains, including school attendance and attainment, social engagement and occupational opportunities. And there seems to be some evidence that many young carers report mental health problems as well, but there's a real lack of comparative quantitative research using large data sets to really try and understand the causal impact of caring on mental health. So in this study, we aim to examine the effect of being an informal carer at the age of 14 or 15 years old on mental health 4 years later at the age of 18 or 19 years. Now, to do this, we used a sample of over 2,000 young people from the longitudinal study of Australian children. And based on survey responses to questions about caring, we categorised participants into three categories. So there was daily caring, less than daily caring, and no caring at all. And this was collected when they were 14 to 15 years old. And then we compared the mental health of these three groups 4 years later when they were 18 to 19 years old. And mental health at this age was assessed using a validated measure of mental health called the Kessler-10, which measures mental health on a scale of 10 to 50. And to look at the association, we use this method called augmented inverse probability weighting. And this is a really quite robust way of trying to estimate the mental health impact and maximise that causal inference. So these are the results, and these results compare each of the caring categories to no caring at all. And so if the estimates were on 0, it would show no effect. So you can see that there's an effect on mental health for each category, and I'll talk through these in the next slide. So we found this clear mental health effect, and we found that the average treatment effect for daily caring on mental health was 1.94. So if you were carrying out daily caring, your mental health would be 1.94 points poorer than if you're a non-carer. And for those who were providing caring but less frequently, so not daily, the average treatment effect on mental health was 0.83. So this is saying that if you were less than daily caring, your mental health would be 0.83 points poorer than if you're a non-carer. And while these associations might seem small, in public health, we sort of think about what this is doing at a group or population level. And these shifts can really be tipping a group of young people into clinical levels of psychological distress. So in summarising, these findings provide evidence that informal caring at the age of 14 to 15 years can be associated with poor mental health 4 years later. And the greatest effects appear to be greater for those that are providing the more frequent caring. So perhaps picking up on that more intensive sort of caring. In terms of implications, the study really highlights the need to support young informal carers to really mitigate this mental health impact. And this is particularly important for those who are providing the more frequent caring. There are many unknowns, and there's really a clear need to carry out more research on young carers. We need to understand how to best identify young carers. As Katie has mentioned, this is really complicated and difficult for a number of reasons, including the fact that many do not identify as a carer. There's a fear of removal and there's many other reasons. We also need to know how best to measure and operationalise young caring. And most importantly, we need to know how to help and support young carers' mental health. And thank you. Thanks. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, George Disney and Anka Singh. And for anyone interested, that paper is being published with Lancet Regional Health. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we often talk about the impacts of caring, but I think that's really, that research has really shown that through that study. And I think importantly, it is about, what does that mental health support look like? There is that identification and recognition of being a young carer, but particularly what does that mental health support look like for young carers? And, I think the mental health system, that's a whole other debate and discussion. And a lot of, I suppose, governments often throw money at mental health, but it is really about making sure it is providing the right supports, making sure that resources are available, and whether that's human resources or other resources, that they are available and accessible and are relevant to young people. So thank you very much. So we are now going to move into the breakout rooms, and instructions will come up again on your screen. And like we did for the earlier session, if you were here for that session, we're going to have some discussion there and then feedback from those groups after a short time. So if you would like to then join those groups, and then we're going to look at a couple of questions specifically, which are also up on your screen at the moment. So they're just putting up the instructions for the groups now, and then we'll feed back and come back shortly. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Tanya and Paris. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you've had some interesting discussion. I'm just waiting for everyone just to join us back from the breakout rooms. So I think we've got most people back now. So like we did last time, we'll just get some feedback and just key points that have been discussed. So again, there was 5 groups. So the first group, Sarah.
Yes, hello. So first group, we had a good little small group and we were able to discuss a lot. And it was really great, I think, to have some diverse perspectives, carers and researchers and a mix, people with multiple roles. And I think one of the things we really recognised was that there's many commonalities across the different experiences of caring, and that in the young carer context, it's really about identifying those caring roles and the need for support at an early stage, because we talked about caring being a valuable role and a valuable contribution, but something that, as we've seen today, you can have compounding disadvantage across the life course if you're not linked into support. And so we briefly touched on opportunities for schools and health professionals to be able to just really explore how to support young carers better. And we also talked about the importance of research and understanding the different caring perspectives as well.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So I think group 2, Jade.
Hi, thanks, Elena. So our group had very similar comments to yours, Sarah, which is wonderful actually to see a lot of that sort of similar thinking in terms of creating greater supports for young carers. So quite a large interest in trying to provide much more on the ground, local community-based support, particularly through some of our examples were local churches, sporting clubs as having a strong basis already in many of those communities, and as well as trying to potentially modify or improve the training that teachers have being sort of frontline across both primary and high school. So very much trying to sort of see these sort of local supports to come together for young carers.
Great, thanks, Jade. Challenge is always getting into schools for young carers with all of their competing priorities. So group number 3, Michelle.
Hi. We also talked a bit about, some of the things that Sarah had mentioned, but we talked about young carers as hidden carers. And a lot of our conversation was about the importance of identification of young carers and how this is challenging, but also the increased need for, heightened community awareness about young carers. One of the group members mentioned that she couldn't think of a promotional campaign or any kind of public health campaign or something like that. That was, something out there to increase awareness of young carers. But we talked about some of the different avenues for identification and different people who should be involved, much like what Sarah said. So we talked about a range of health professionals, maybe who could add this to their intake form, or be part of an assessment of when they're seeing a patient to see if there's a young carer involved, like GPs. Also, any emergency contacts, emergency room contacts, or emergency departments. If people are, having to call for help at any point in time, that's a good opportunity to find out if there's a young carer involved. Also, disability aged care services can be looking for this. And the Carers Helpline was mentioned as a really important thing that, particularly if counselors who are talking to young carers have the appropriate skill set to support them, that would be important. But potentially the Carers Helpline could be really important in this identification as well.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Fantastic. The fourth group, Lucas.
Yes, we're talking also around identification a lot, about the importance of key relationships with teachers or with other support people to identify young carers, and sort of the need to raise awareness among them. And then we talked a lot about sort of that it's very hard to find key support persons that help actually organize support both for the carer and for the person being cared for, and again around the need for sort of a holistic psychosocial support system that doesn't focus only on one person but focuses on the person that requiring care and the carer, and that there are key connectors needed into the support systems, and that they also need to link across transitions out of the high school into university and out of university into working life.
Great, thanks, Lucas. And our final group, Michael.
Well, look, I'm hoping not to dominate or anything like that. We had a very interesting group, and essentially the topics that came up, Katie mentioned how she works on the Carer Gateway and spoke about how difficult it is finding resources and appropriate resources for young carers. She knows what she'd like to get, but finding them is difficult. It's also difficult identifying young carers. And we spoke quite a bit about what would work, and while we didn't have any real full answers, Tanya spoke about a couple of different services she knew. Jesuit Navigator program in Victoria seems to be pretty good. Little Dreamers, I think, was another one she mentioned. Graham asked whether we could link in with schools and universities. And another person who mentioned that all the different aspects that were spoken about at the first session, because carers are so invisible and because they're gendered, people don't know their stories. And so they're often criticised as being lazy for not working and ignorant for not knowing what should happen. Their financial circumstances also limits what they can do. So it's a sort of a vicious circle that they're caught in. So I hope that's good. Others might be able to amend that account.
That's right. Thank you, Michael. I think lots of obviously common themes across all of our discussion points today around transitions and those transitions into care but also out of care, and the importance around timely and targeted support and early intervention in particular, but also I think, that support around carers in employment, but also the figures and things from Alistair's important study and those opportunity costs that have been lost to carers, and what we may be able to do and advocate for to redress some of that. So I think really important points, and I want to thank our four speakers, Sebastian, Alastair, Paris and Tanya today for their personal stories, but also their fantastic research. And I think we had a real balance of views that brought up a whole lot of things for discussion, which is great. I also want to thank the team at IPPG and Carers New South Wales behind the scenes in getting things together. We've had a few sort of COVID impacts and changes to behind the scenes personnel at different points over the week. So I want to thank everyone for their support there. So thank you very, very much. Now we can, we're going to take a 30-minute break. For those that want to come back to a more informal discussion, there is the virtual cafe, Transitions in Economic Participation, starting at 4:30 on the same link. I think there's still some comments coming up in the chat, and there's also an evaluation form there, I think, as well. So I would like to thank everyone for their participation. I think it's just the start of the conversation today on these important issues around transitions, and we will take it from there. And thank you to everyone for being involved and for supporting the Care and Knowledge Exchange.